I have waited so long for this moment. It was goddamn worth it. Remnant 2 was genuinely the only game I was looking forward to this year, and I did have good reasons for it. The original game was fucking lit. Really, I think it was one of the best experiences I've had with a game in my life, and I look back at it really fondly. I actually felt like the biggest piece of shit on the planet because I had so much fun in it, and I did get it for free on Epic. But enough about that. Remnant 2 plays out in the magical land of Poland. So the first logical thing to do is obviously get the fuck out. Fuck, this isn't really much better, is it? But anyway, this game is a so-called Souls-like, so you already know it's going to be difficult. However, what makes it stand out from the crowd is one little detail: guns. Most of the games in this category have a melee-based combat system, and therefore Remnant sticks out like a sore thumb with its uncompromising fast-action gunplay. But even when confronted by a gamer god prodigy like yourself, who spent countless hours puff-stomping unsuspecting enemy gamers, you're going to have problems, buddy. Just like in every other game of this type, each encounter should be treated with caution, and no matter how good your aim and equipment is, do not underestimate your opponent. However, your brawn won't be the only thing put up to the test. Unfortunately, this piece of media also requires a little long-forgotten part of your body: the brain. Remnant is not only a great and unique twist on the Souls-like genre, but it is also a spiritual successor to the original Dr. Kawashima's brain training on the DS. That is because your mental capabilities will be pushed to their absolute limit with how deep and complex this game tends to be. And it isn't just the quote-unquote puzzles, because that would also include the countless gear configurations you can create to complement each of the many available playstyles, choices you make along the way that will influence what kind of rewards you will be given, a long list of character archetypes possessing different traits and abilities. And on top of all that, this already excessively complex and rich game is also randomly generated. Like, what? And I'm not just talking about like one or two small things, like an NPC being fuck knows where every time you start a new save. You are going to have an entirely different experience than somebody else might have. First of all, you might start in 3 entirely different worlds that present a completely distinct journey and offer loot that is accessible strictly in them. Second, even if you get the same starting area as somebody else, the variety of set pieces that make each one might not only be totally dissimilar and presented in a different order, but straight up not have some of the more specific locations. And third, every world will have only one of the 2 main bosses, and those can give you a plethora of unique items depending on what path you'll decide to follow. One last thing to remember is that, for example, if you want to get your grubby hands on a particular weapon, amulet, or any other piece of equipment, and unfortunately, your world just so happens to not have it, there always is the option of choosing adventure mode. It basically allows you to pick between the 3 main areas and get a new randomly generated map to explore and find your desired item, while keeping all of your progress and equipment. It is a very highly appreciated feature, because it doesn't keep everything there is to find and explore in the game behind a giant middle finger that would be making a new save every time you do not get exactly what you wanted. Phew, all this might be a lot to take in, and it is, but it's just a very simplified version of what this game actually is, and we are still just scratching the surface of everything great it has to offer. Remnant is hard. Not ridiculously hard, but at times quite challenging. And of course, the first choice you'll make, right after making your goblin of a character, is choose the difficulty: Survivor, Veteran, Nightmare and Apocalypse. Now listen, whatever these scary descriptions might say, never pick Survivor. I'm comfortable saying that I consider myself to be generally pretty good at shooters. However, I'm not great, by any means, just a little above average, and I decided to start on Veteran difficulty, which seemed reasonable. My first playthrough went well, but I felt that something was missing. So the second time around I said fuck it, and decided to see what Nightmare was all about. And just after a couple of hours, it clicked. And even though I technically already beat this game, I started to have the time of my life and almost rediscovered this whole game. The main difference between Veteran and Nightmare was that on the first one, the game is a little bit too forgiving. Like, sure, you're going to die here or there, and the bosses are going to pose quite the obstacle from time to time regardless, but you can still just brute your way through, and that way you won't be encouraged to take time to analyze your opponents and learn how to efficiently defeat them. And in my opinion, that just goes against the game's own philosophy. Starting that second playthrough on Nightmare was like getting hit by a bucket of ice-cold water. I quickly realized I wasn't the hot shit I thought I was, and almost every other enemy kicked my ass because I just couldn't gun them down before they even approached me. And once they got too close, I had no idea how their attack patterns worked. Because up until now, I never was forced to learn them, so I just spammed the dodge button and prayed that I came out alive. Mind you, that was after I already finished the game. I technically knew and beat all of those enemies, and yet I felt utterly powerless and fragile. This might sound really counterintuitive, but that was great! The game felt fresh and much more gratifying, since every encounter forced me to learn and adapt. Hence, even if you're not so sure of your abilities, always pick at least Veteran. With that covered, you can finally start. After the cute introduction segment, you will be promptly thrown onto the deep end. Depending on a roll of the dice, you can end up in one of the three previously mentioned worlds: Nerud, Geisha, and Blossom. No matter which one you will get, your starting experience won't differ much, as in every open world, you don't have to solely focus on your main objective. Hell, you probably shouldn't. This game shines the most in its exploration segments, and luckily, that takes up most of its runtime. Every area in a world has its own quirks, crafting items, different enemies, and secrets that you won't wanna miss. So the game makes sure exploring each one thoroughly is not only extremely fun, but also rewards curious players with game-changing abilities, gear, weapons, or even new archetypes to play around with. I consider it to be an amazingly well-executed subject by the developers, that do not patronize their players and won't back down from making something difficult or complicated just to pamper someone who won't put in the effort. There are a lot of great examples that showcase exactly that, but I'll start with the Lament dungeon in Geisha. It is an area that almost completely lacks enemies and is instead filled with puzzles, traps, and most important of all, secrets. While not only being something unlike everything else in the game, it will also reward you differently depending on how much you are willing to look for secrets, which there are plenty of. And I just think that's pretty goddamn cool. After a substantial amount of adventuring, you are bound to have at least a bit of resources on ya. These can be spent on upgrading your weapons, buying new ones, acquiring new rings, amulets, and trinkets, unlocking new weapon mods, and much more. This all happens in the main hub area of the game, Ward 13, which provides a much-needed safe haven. Most of the time you'll be pushing your way through out there, coming ever closer to your goals, and come back from time to time to upgrade your gear or craft new one, to be able to make even more progress. You repeat this loop throughout the entirety of the game, but the ever-changing obstacles and rewards that come with them make this a smooth and very enjoyable experience that doesn't go stale as you move on. Moving our attention to that gear, there is a lot to talk about. First and foremost, archetypes. In the beginning you will be able to only choose from the starting four: Medic, Hunter, Challenger, and Handler. But as you go on, you will discover and craft new ones that, after unlocking, can be picked at the very beginning of the game. The final number increases to 11 different archetypes. However, you can not only have two active at the same time, but also change them around anytime you want, given that you have the item associated with them. Everyone has 4 passive perks, 3 skills, and a unique trait. To unlock all, you'll have to level the class up to its 10th level, where all your perks are being used while you can only choose one skill from each of your active archetypes. Secondly, guns. You got handguns and long guns, and one of each can be held at a time. The former is supposed to be your secondary weapon, while the latter acts as a primary. You can also divide them both between regular and special ones. Regular weapons offer more elasticity, as they do not have a built-in weapon modification, and you can instead equip them with one of the countless different mods you can craft, while the special weapons have a specific intended use that centers around their unique mod, which cannot be changed. Both weapon types are upgradable at rigs, but special ones cap out at level 10, while the regular ones at level 20. All of these can also be given mutators that can change up your gameplay even further, like the Refunder, which will cause some of the ammo spent on shots to be transferred back into your reserves. Crafting new weapons and mods for them is usually done with the help of McCabe, while making and upgrading mutators happens as it dwells. Alternatively, there is also a plethora of weapons you can buy at any given time with just scrap from Brabus. There are also quite a lot of melee options, but hand-to-hand combat isn't very expanded, and just works as an extra way to preserve ammo, and your picks will be usually purely aesthetical. Armor might be the next most important thing you can think of. However, Remnant doesn't put a lot of focus on it. Based on its total weight, it can be light, medium, heavy or ultra heavy. The heavier it gets, the bigger your stamina penalty will be, and the slower your dodge will become, until you ultimately just flop on the ground while carrying ultra heavy armor. Like, what is this? Wearing full sets of the same armor won't grant you any extra benefits, so you should pick and choose between different pieces to get the best value while remaining in your targeted encumbrance threshold. Rings and amulets are used with each other to create builds and increase a certain type of damage dealt, resistances, or any other player statistic. Rings will offer more minor advantages, of which 4 can be equipped at a time, and amulets will usually change your gameplay in a more significant way. Only one of those can be active. Relics are a much more niche piece of equipment. The base stuff will just heal you up on use, and it will take some time before you even realize you can choose and acquire different ones. The starting number of 3 can be increased once you acquire a very rare material, Simulacrum. Just head to Wallace, and there you can craft and add another one to your stash. The last thing I'll talk about in this section are the traits. You have the core ones, those which are unlocked by playing a specific archetype, and the rest can be obtained by completing events or choosing a certain path. Each can be upgraded to the 10th level, and there is no limit to how many you can have at a time. However, there is a limit to how many points you can spend freely, and once a point is spent, you can only get it back by visiting all of them at Wallace's. Bosses could technically be classified under the gameplay section. However, I think they play such a crucial part that they deserve their own segment. And just like in all the other Souls-likes, these huge hunks of meat are the main course and play an important role of blocking your progress and being figurative stepping stones to achieving the ultimate goal. Remnant in that regard is no different. Every world will have of course their one main foe, but as mentioned, there is variety to those as well, and depending on your world generation, you will get one of the two and that one only. These opponents always offer great loot for defeating them, as you can always expect to come out with a new gun or blade, which unfortunately you will still need to craft at the expense of your stashed goods. But most often than not, choosing a path or acquiring certain items can reward you with completely different stuff from the same boss, or even grant you an alternative fight. This goes up to the point that I beat my first world boss without even laying a finger on him, and instead charmed him with my incredible charisma. That very same boss, the Corrupted Ravager, apart from being entirely skippable, which is in my opinion hilarious, offers 5 alternative items based on how you choose to beat them. It's a clever way to not only create alternative paths to approach these obstacles, but also give the player a choice on a reward that he finds most lucrative. Everything set up to this point also applies to the other more niche bunch of big bads. Some optional, some not, but they are just as hard as every other one. There are also enemies called aberrations, which are kind of like mini-bosses, so just juiced up variants of the typical combatants you encounter. But there is one that stands above all else. Not even the final boss comes close to his prowess, strength and agility. I'm of course talking about gold. Seriously, I can take the piss out of this game all I want for having a secret boss be one unit of a swine, but something in my little A brain just causes this to be the most infuriating fucker in this game hands down. And that's also thanks to the fact that this pig, he doesn't really know how to exist in a 3-dimensional plane either. Yeah. All in all, horrible boss, but I'm going to put it in A tier because you can play for time and, like, come on, it's a huge fucking pig, how can anything be more awesome? Like, look at it. Isn't that cool? And talking more about fights themselves, apart from this beast, I don't think there is a single bad or annoying one. They all range from at least good to holy shit, I fought God and now I took his place. Some might seem tedious at the beginning, but given a few tries, you'll start to see openings or weaknesses that will grant you the upper hand, so dying a handful of times is to be expected. And thanks to that, finally coming out on top feels so much better for it. Talking about how games look has always got to be my favorite part, and Remnant can be a treat. Generally speaking, the game looks phenomenal. Not only are the models and animations of very high quality, but areas are filled to the brim with theming, and each one tries their hardest to be distinct and memorable. While the game doesn't have a particular style, it mixes qualities of realism, fantasy, and science fiction. The world can be truly mesmerizing at times, and the amount of detail that was put into each environment makes it burst with life. A huge role in that was played by the completely dissimilar settings each world presents. Geisha is a beautiful world utterly engulfed by the main antagonist of the entire series, the Root. Local fauna has been mostly replaced by its bulky spawn and harsh dominating tendrils that change the land to their image. And what remain are ruins and mindless horrors wandering the woods. Nerud is a desolate wasteland located at the very edge of a black hole, once inhabited by a highly advanced and pride civilization seeking enlightenment at any cost, now taken by ruin and overrun by pests and long-abandoned machinery still following its protocols. Lawson is a land made by two merging worlds of Fae and Dran. The first live in luxurious castles and put on a distinguished look, while the others are just off-brand British people roaming the streets at night. There is also the Labyrinth. Sitting at the center of the universe, it blurs the line between science and magic, and aims to keep the Root at bay, which obviously it failed at horribly up to this point. Worst example of that is the last and final area of the game, Root Earth, source of all the corruption. While your Earth was destroyed by the Root, this one was absorbed by it. No other life form managed to prevail here, and everything was reshaped by its endless hunger to control all. Wrapping this whole thing up, I can safely say that Remnant did not disappoint. Although I am a hefty 60 hours in, there is still quite a lot of things I haven't truly played around with. Not only am I still excited to play this game, which I promptly will right after finishing this dumbass script, but it still has thrilling new surprises up its sleeve. So yeah, if you're into games that are mostly about you dying, then man, I feel ya, but also go play this game.